When I opened my eyes, everything was white. The ceiling, the sheets, the curtains gently dancing by the window. I could hear the steady beeping of machines, soft, rhythmic. I'd been asleep a long time, they told me. A coma. Induced, they said. Necessary. But all I could think was, why does my chest feel like it's caving in? A nurse walked in with a kind smile holding a tablet. Your daughter asked me to give this to you, just some messages to make you smile. She placed it gently in my hands and turned away to adjust the IV. My fingers were trembling, slow. My skin looked pale, almost foreign. I tapped the screen expecting photos of my granddaughter or kind messages from the women at church. But instead, it opened to a notification. Congratulations to the newlyweds, Mark and Elisa. I froze. Elisa, my sister. Mark, my husband. I thought it was a mistake. Maybe a pop-up ad. Maybe someone else with the same names. But there it was. My husband's arm around her waist, his hand on the small of her back like it used to be with me. The same tired smile he once gave me on Sunday mornings. Her white dress clinging to her like a crown. His suit, my favorite navy one. And their wedding date? Just 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago, I was in a hospital bed on life support, and they were saying vows. No one said a word. Not my sister, not my daughter, not even the man I once trusted with everything I was. My breath caught in my throat, not from pain, not from illness, but from something colder. That was the moment I realized he didn't just want freedom, he wanted to leave with something he never earned. He wanted my life, my home, my legacy, and he gave it to the one person I never guarded myself from. If this story grips you, subscribe for more real-life betrayals, revenge, and justice told from a woman's point of view.
I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just placed the tablet on the tray table beside me, turned my face to the window, and let the quiet do what it always had. Hold me. But once you see something like that, you start replaying every moment you thought was normal. And suddenly it all unravels. He had started being extra kind right before my fall, making tea without me asking, rubbing my shoulders when I said I was tired, kissing my forehead every morning like clockwork, not out of affection, but routine, rehearsed. I didn't see it then, but now I know. It was guilt, or worse, preparation. Back then, I had fainting spells that came and went. He always brushed it off. You just need rest, he'd say. He made my meals. He offered to help more. That would have been sweet if it hadn't also come with quiet arguments, shorter answers, and that strange flicker in his eyes whenever I asked where he'd been. He was getting everything in order, making himself look like the savior, so when I collapsed, he could play the hero, not the executioner. And my sister? Elisa started coming over more frequently. She said she was helping out. Sometimes I'd wake from a nap and hear them laughing in the kitchen. I'd walk in, and they'd both hush. Her hand would still be on his arm. She'd say something about a funny meme. He'd pretend to cough, and I'd pretend not to notice. But there was one moment I'll never forget. I had just come out of the bathroom one night, barefoot, robe clutched at my chest, and I saw him standing outside my bedroom door, whispering on the phone. When he noticed me, he jumped like a child caught stealing cookies. "Work call," he mumbled. But his phone screen was still lit. The name flashing across it? Elisa Ring. I didn't ask. I didn't accuse. I went back to bed and told myself I was overthinking. That was my mistake. I gave them the silence they needed to plan. Another time, I found a receipt in the trash. A hotel just 30 minutes from our home. 2 nights, champagne package, rose petals. He told me it was for a colleague who was proposing to his girlfriend and didn't know how to book online. I nodded, smiled, took the trash out. And then there was the smoothie. He'd been encouraging me to drink this new smoothie every morning, said it was filled with antioxidants and brain-boosting herbs. It tasted like chalk. But I trusted him until the morning I felt my body give out halfway up the stairs. Doctors never found what caused it. Said it was exhaustion, stress. But my body knew better. He started spending more nights working late, and Elisa, she had just gone through a bad breakup, so she said. Started dressing differently, staying longer, sleeping in our guest room. One night, I walked past the door and it wasn't shut. It was slightly ajar and I could hear murmuring. Not just voices, intimacy. That night, I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling fan. And for the first time in my life, I realized I wasn't sharing my life anymore. I was being replaced in it, like one of those faded family portraits people quietly swap out for new ones. I was no longer the wife. I was the obstacle. And once I fell into that coma, I became the silence they needed to finish their story. The next part of this tale doesn't begin in that hospital bed. It begins in the past, when I first saw my daughter's eyes flicker with doubt the day I tried to tell her the truth. That's when the pain became layered. Not just betrayal from my husband, not just betrayal from my sister, but from my own blood.
The day after I was discharged, she came to pick me up. My daughter, my only child. She walked in with that nervous, overcompensating smile people wear when they're hiding something heavy. She adjusted my blanket, carried my bag, and told me everything was going to be okay. But I could feel it in her hands. Something was missing. Or maybe it was already gone. She helped me into the passenger seat, buckled my belt like I was 5 again, and turned the engine on. Then came the silence. No update about the house, no mention of her father, not even a passing word about Elisa. So I asked. I didn't ask with rage. I didn't even ask with suspicion. I asked the way a mother asks her child when she already knows the answer, but hopes she's wrong. Did you know? She blinked. About what, Mama? I looked out the window for a moment, just to gather enough strength to say it again. About your father and Elisa. She kept her eyes on the road, gripped the steering wheel harder. Then, as if she had rehearsed it, Mama, you were in a coma. You don't know everything that happened. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. She added, quieter. He was hurting too. We all were. Aunt Elisa, she was there for us. My chest burned. There it was. Not just the betrayal, not just the erasure, but the gaslight. It's one thing to be stabbed by strangers. It's another to be bandaged by the same hands that watched you bleed. I turned to face her. I saw the wedding announcement. I know what I saw. She glanced at me, eyes wide, then flicked them back to the road. A deep exhale left her lips. I didn't know they got married, she said finally. They told me after. Said they didn't want to stress you, that it was more for closure. Closure. As if I was the dead wife and Elisa the widow. I closed my eyes, leaned my head back, and whispered, "Did you believe them?" No answer. Just the hum of the tires on the road. I remembered every birthday party where I let her aunt hold her first. Every sleepover where I let Elisa braid her hair and whisper stories into her ear. I remembered the matching dresses, the family trips, the secrets they shared. I thought I was raising a daughter, not a witness to my undoing. In her mind, I was still the mother, the caregiver, but somehow her heart had been rehomed. Somewhere between her father's charm and her aunt's presence, my daughter had let go of me. Quietly. It wasn't even malicious. She thought she was doing what was best. That's what made it hurt the most. She wasn't cruel, just convinced. And what is more painful than watching your child trust your betrayers over your truth? That night, after she dropped me off and made excuses not to stay, "I have work early, Mama, but I'll come tomorrow." I sat in my living room alone. The couch felt unfamiliar. The curtains had been changed. The pictures on the wall,
Some were missing. Some were rearranged. I walked slowly through the house, steadying myself against the walls. In the kitchen, a new wine glass set I didn't buy. In the bathroom, a bottle of perfume I never wore. And on the vanity in my bedroom, a lipstick shade I hadn't touched in years. Elisa's. My daughter hadn't just accepted their story. She had lived in it, slept under its roof, ate from its fridge, laughed in its living room, all while I lay somewhere between breath and nothing, with tubes in my arms and wires in my chest. That night, I sat in the dark. No lights, no television. Just the hum of the refrigerator and the distant ticking of the hallway clock. I didn't cry. I just sat still, letting the silence wrap around me like a shawl. Because I knew now, this wasn't about love or family or even betrayal. This was about possession. They didn't just take my husband. They tried to take my place. And they almost succeeded. But what they forgot, what they always forget about women like me, is that you can take our name, our house, even our child for a while, but you'll never carry what we carry quietly: memory, evidence, and the will to reclaim everything with silence so sharp, it cuts deeper than screams.
I woke up the next morning to the sound of voices outside. A woman was laughing, light, chirpy, far too familiar. And then his voice, Mark. I sat up slowly and moved toward the window, careful not to let the curtain sway. There they were, my ex-husband in disguise, watering the flowers I planted 15 years ago. And standing beside him, in my robe, was Elisa, holding his coffee, smiling like she belonged. I didn't go outside. I didn't say a word. Instead, I turned back into the house, my house, and for the first time since I returned from that hospital, I realized something was deeply wrong. I didn't recognize the locks on the doors. I tried the key I'd used for decades. It didn't turn. And that's when the seed of fear bloomed in my chest. Not just that I had been betrayed, but that I was no longer legally safe in the very home I built. I called my daughter. No answer. I called my lawyer instead. I told him everything. And I'll never forget his silence when I said, "They got married while I was in a coma." There was a long pause on the other end before he finally spoke. "Let me look into the house deed. Don't sign anything. Don't say anything. Just wait." 3 days later, he came to the house himself, folder in hand, expression like a man carrying news too heavy for words. "You're going to want to sit down," he said. So I did. And that's when he told me. Years ago, when my daughter started her small business, I gave her a stake in the house so she could get a tax break. We never thought twice about it. It was still my home. But legally, the paperwork showed shared ownership between me and my daughter. And sometime while I was in the hospital, she quietly transferred her share to him. He told her it was temporary, that it was just to protect assets, that it was for my benefit. I stared at the wall, hands folded, trying not to break. I thought of the birthday dinners I hosted here, the prayers, the nights I stayed up rocking my daughter to sleep during storms, the morning Elisa moved in with me when her first marriage fell apart. And now, they had filed for full ownership of the house, my house, and legally, they had a shot, unless I was willing to fight. But my lawyer wasn't done. He flipped the folder open and pointed to a line on the deed my daughter had signed. "A gift deed," he said. "She transferred it as a gift to your husband." I blinked. What does that mean? It means we can challenge it. She can't take it back. And if we dig deeper, we might find this whole transaction was done under misrepresentation or coercion. He paused, then added quietly, "You still have a way out, but you have to play smarter, not louder." I felt something rise in me. Not anger, not sadness, strategy.
He thought he had won. He thought I'd wake up, see their faces, and disappear in shame. But he didn't expect me to read the fine print. He didn't expect me to sit across from my grief and sharpen it into a tool. So I took the documents. I read every line. I spoke to financial advisors, estate lawyers, title experts, and I said nothing to them. Not a word. I smiled when I passed them in the hallway. I offered Elisa tea when she brought it to the kitchen. I even laughed when Mark made a joke during dinner, pretending things were still healing. But behind my back, I was unbuilding the story they tried to write. And when my daughter finally returned, head down, voice soft, I asked her the one question that had been rotting in my chest for days. Did he promise you something? She didn't answer. She didn't have to. I could see it in her eyes. She had been sold a future in exchange for my past. But the paper trail was mine now. The cracks had formed, and the house, this house, was no longer a battleground. It was the trap they walked into. One clause, one signature, one assumption too many. They had built their lies on land I had already fortified with truth, and the next time they smiled in my face, they wouldn't realize they were smiling at the woman who had already started reclaiming everything, quietly, legally, and permanently. Because what they forgot is this: you don't steal from a woman who built with both hands. You only delay the moment she takes it all back.
I needed someone to talk to. Not a lawyer, not a planner, just someone who remembered who I used to be before all this. Before the coma, the betrayal, the silence. So I called my brother. Jeremiah was always the rational one in the family. Quiet, thoughtful. He once drove 6 hours just to change my flat tire when Mark was too busy. I thought if anyone would understand, it would be him. He picked up after the second ring. "Hey, sis," he said. Casual. Too casual. I told him everything, piece by piece. The coma, the wedding, the house deed. My voice didn't shake. I wanted him to hear not just the facts, but the calm determination in my tone. When I finished, there was a pause. Then he said, "Well, maybe Mark thought you weren't coming back." I blanked. I was in a coma, not buried. He sighed. "I'm not saying it was right. I'm just saying it must have been hard on him. And Elisa was always close to you. Maybe they just leaned on each other." I didn't scream. I didn't argue. I just said, "Thank you for your honesty," and ended the call. I sat there for a long time afterward. That kind of silence isn't empty. It's full of realizations you don't want. So I tried again. I called my mother-in-law. Surely she would defend her grandchildren's home. She loved me once, called me her second daughter. When I told her, she chuckled, not kindly. "I always said Mark needed someone who wouldn't fall apart every time life got hard." I closed my eyes. Her voice grated. "Elisa is stronger than you think, and at least she stuck around when you were sick." That was it. That's all it took for her to choose a side. I called no one else that day, because in that moment, I finally understood something people don't want to admit. Some people only love you when you're useful. When you host the dinners, bake the cakes, babysit their children, write the birthday cards, cover the bills, forgive the late-night calls, when you make life softer for them. But once you can't serve, once you become the one who needs, they rewrite your story. They reduce you to your worst day and pretend it was your
every day. They say things like, she's not well, and she was always a little dramatic, and he did what he had to do. They protect the comfort of the betrayer because it feels more familiar than the pain of confronting the truth. So I stopped calling, stopped explaining, stopped hoping anyone would step in and say what they did was wrong, because none of them would. And maybe they never truly loved me, just the version of me that made their lives easier. But that realization, it didn't break me. It freed me. Because when you stop expecting help, you start building strength. Alone. Brick by brick. I stood in the mirror that night and looked at myself. Not the lines, not the fatigue, not the body recovering from illness, but the eyes. And I said out loud, "They are not your people." Then I turned off the light and went to sleep, because the war had already begun, and I needed to be sharp for what came next. The silence was no longer grief. It was strategy. I stopped reacting. No more raised voices, no tears, no phone calls, no explanations. Just silence. And in that silence, I watched them grow comfortable. Mark started walking through the house like he owned it, feet on the coffee table, remote in hand, laughing louder than necessary. Elisa changed the curtains in the living room, replaced the welcome mat, and moved some of my heirlooms into storage boxes without asking. They thought I had surrendered, but I was watching, listening, moving pieces in the background. My lawyer advised me, let them feel secure. Let them make the next mistake. And they did. It started with the car. The second car that was in my name, but that Mark had been driving since the hospital. I noticed he suddenly removed the insurance sticker and registered it under Elisa's boutique business account, an attempt to hide assets. Then came the bank account activity. A joint account I'd opened years ago for household expenses. I hadn't touched it since the coma, but Mark had. Quiet withdrawals, just under reportable limits, spaced weeks apart. Not enough to alert a bank, but enough to fund something he didn't want me to see. He was building a story, and stories require props. Photos of him with Elisa at charity events started surfacing online. New matching wedding bands. An Our Journey blog post went up with the title, "When Love Finds You Again After Loss." After loss. As if I were already gone. But while they were curating their fantasy, I was preparing reality. I met quietly with a financial investigator, had my lawyer file a request to freeze the joint account while ownership was under legal dispute. I rented a secure storage facility and moved every important document, birth certificates, estate papers, even old love letters I knew he'd try to weaponize, all without saying a word. I became polite, predictable, a ghost in my own home. One morning, my daughter came over, sat at the kitchen island while I stirred soup. "Mama," she said quietly, "they're talking about selling the house." I didn't stop stirring. "And?" She hesitated. "They said, if you agreed to move out quietly, they'd give you $50,000, a fresh start." I ladled soup into a bowl and placed it in front of her. Then I looked her in the eyes. "They're not offering that to be kind. They're offering it because they're scared, and they should be." She didn't eat, just stared at the steam rising. I could feel her slipping back toward me inch by inch, but it wasn't time to pull her in yet. Not until the game was over. Because this wasn't about money anymore. Mark didn't want compensation. He wanted erasure. He wanted the story to end with him as the grieving loyal husband who found solace in family. and I was the inconvenient truth still breathing. So I stayed silent until the day I made my final move. Because once a man declares war on a woman's legacy, she only needs one shot. And I had spent months aiming in the dark, quietly, patiently, without tremble. And now, I was ready to pull the trigger.
It happened on a Tuesday, the kind of day no one expects anything from. Mark had taken Elisa to a winery outside town for the day. His attempt at romance, or perhaps just distraction. They left late morning, laughing, kissing loudly in the driveway like teenagers playing house. I watched them from the kitchen window, tea in hand, not blinking, not smiling. When their car disappeared around the bend, I moved. I pulled out a key they didn't know existed, one the original builder gave me when we first bought the home, long before I ever met Mark. It unlocked the attic, and inside the attic were the original blueprints, the land deed, the letters of ownership, all signed before I added Mark or my daughter to anything. I took them and drove straight to my lawyer's office. He'd been waiting. The papers were ready. Tenant notices, asset protection clauses, the silent trust registration, and something new, a temporary rental agreement I had arranged for the house, placing it under the short-term lease of a retired judge and her husband, friends of my late father. With that document, the house would no longer be a marital home in question. It would become a legal income property protected under lease law. I signed every page, not with vengeance, with clarity. Then I called a locksmith. By the time Mark and Elisa returned, the locks had been changed. There was a simple white envelope taped to the front door. Mark snatched it off and read it with a sneer that turned pale. "This has to be a mistake," Elisa said, clutching his arm. It wasn't. Inside was a copy of the new lease, a certified letter from my lawyer, and a personal note in my handwriting. "If you would like to discuss this calmly, we can meet at the cafe across from the courthouse at noon tomorrow. No need for drama, just dignity." They didn't show up, but Elisa did, alone and late. She came in wearing oversized sunglasses and that same tired scarf she used to borrow from me when we were girls. She sat across from me, unsure, cautious. I stirred my tea. She spoke first. "I never meant for any of this to happen." I tilted my head slightly. "Then who signed the marriage license?" She swallowed. I watched her. This wasn't a woman in love. This was a woman in fear because she had tethered herself to a man who was good at lying until the story required truth. "Elisa," I said calmly, "I'm not here to scream or beg. I just need to know one thing." She nodded, hesitant. "Are you ready to be the one washing his mother's socks, waking up to his silence, dodging his phone when it rings past midnight because you'll wonder who he's texting?" She blinked, because I wasn't warning her. I was giving her the future she stole from me. She started to speak, but I raised my hand. "You took what wasn't yours, not just a man, a home, a history, a family. You didn't replace me. You just borrowed my life. But you see, borrowed things come due." I stood, left a $10 bill on the table, and walked out. The next week, the judge and her husband moved in. Mark and Lisa tried to fight it legally, but every angle had been sealed. Every loophole closed, every paper notarized, every dollar traced. Because while they were playing levers in a fantasy, I was quietly building a fortress made of facts. Mark tried calling me once after that. Left a voicemail saying, "We can fix this. You're being petty. This isn't you." But it was me. It was the version of me that rises after she's been buried. The next time I saw him was in court for the divorce hearing. He looked tired. Elisa wasn't there. Rumor had it they were already sleeping in separate rooms. I said nothing that day except what needed to be said on record. And when the judge asked me if I had anything to say to my soon-to-be ex-husband, I simply said, "Your silence tried to write me out of my own story. This was just my rewrite." He stared at me like he didn't recognize who I was anymore. And he didn't, because the woman he tried to erase, she never left. She just returned sharper, quieter, and this time, unerasable. It wasn't over yet. People think signing divorce papers ends everything, but they forget some debts don't sit in bank accounts. Some live in the quiet corners of memory, waiting to be addressed face to face. He called again, left another message. Please, just one conversation. And against every fiber in me that said he doesn't deserve it, I agreed. Because this time, I was no longer the woman waiting to be heard. I was the woman with the truth. We met at a neutral place, a quiet park near the courthouse. He chose the spot, somewhere public enough to avoid a scene, private enough to try and manipulate me one last time. I arrived early. He came 5 minutes late, the way he always used to, so I'd have just enough time to think he might not show and then feel grateful when he did. He sat on the bench beside me. No greeting, just a deep sigh. I never meant to hurt you. I looked straight ahead. You have to understand, after your coma, the doctors weren't hopeful, and Elisa was there every day. At first it was just talking, grieving together. Then, you grieved me before I died. That stopped him. He rubbed his face. You don't know what it was like watching you hooked up to those machines, not knowing if you'd wake up. But I did. He looked away. Yeah, you did. Silence stretched between us. Then I pulled a small folder from my bag. Neat. Labeled. Simple. What's that? Receipts. He hesitated. I opened it and began reading. Calmly. Precisely. Credit card charges for the week before my coma. The hotel stay. Dinner for 2. Flowers. That was for work. I cut him off. Call logs between you and Elisa. Over 300 calls in 1 month. Half of them after midnight. She was checking on you. I was... Emails, I said. The ones you thought you deleted? I had them recovered. Including the one where you wrote, she won't be around much longer anyway. His mouth opened, then shut. I turned to face him fully. You underestimated my silence. He looked down at his shoes. I was scared. I thought if you woke up and found out everything, you'd destroy me. I laughed softly. You destroyed yourself. Then I leaned closer. You could have waited. You could have been a man. You could have mourned with integrity, or at the very least, honored what we built. Instead, you rewrote history before the last chapter ended. I stood up. He reached for my arm, barely touching it. Do you still love me? He asked. That's when I knew he hadn't changed. Not really, because only a man like him could betray you entirely and then ask to be loved for it. No, I said. But I still love who I was before you turned me into a ghost. I stepped back. You tried to make me disappear, Mark. But what you don't understand is women like me don't vanish. We reclaim. And now, you're going to live with the version of me that never needed you in the first place. He didn't speak. He didn't follow. He just sat there, the weight of his choices finally settling in, without anyone left to catch him. As I walked away, I didn't feel victorious. I felt clean. Because the most powerful revenge isn't destruction, it's clarity. The kind that leaves no room for doubt, no space for manipulation, and no words left to be said. I didn't look back. Because there was nothing left behind me worth seeing. The final papers came in the mail a week later. A thick envelope with the court seal and my name printed clearly on the front. Rebecca L. Hargrave. Not Mrs. Mark Hargrave. Not Mrs. anything. Just me. I held it for a while. Not because I was afraid to open it, but because it felt like the last breath of a storm I'd been standing in for far too long. I opened it slowly, read every word, and signed where I needed to. The house was mine. The trust was active. The divorce was final. And the silence? Sacred. No celebration, no champagne, just peace. People always think freedom is loud. Big declarations, fireworks, a new haircut. But sometimes freedom is a quiet morning in your own kitchen. Barefoot, no footsteps echoing behind you, just the soft hiss of a kettle and a single cup on the counter. Because you finally know who you're pouring into. I left the city soon after. Not to run, not to escape, but to begin. On my terms. I moved to a small town by the water. Rented a modest little home with creaky floors and sun-streaked windows. I took a part-time job at the local library, shelving books, helping children find stories, watching the seasons change from the reading nook by the window. It was the kind of job no one brags about, but it saved me. Because every day I returned to a version of myself that had nothing to prove, no mask to wear, no war to fight. I wore simple clothes, ate quiet meals, kept a planet I named after my grandmother. And every night, I lit a candle by the window, not for anyone else to see, but for me. A soft reminder, you made it back to yourself. As for Mark, I never heard from him again, but word travels. Always does. The judge and her husband renewed their lease twice. When Mark tried to buy back in, he was told, politely and legally, he no longer had a claim to anything inside the gates. Elisa left him 6 months later. Apparently, he had changed. Or maybe he hadn't changed at all, and she finally saw the parts I tried to warn her about. Their social circle shrank. The blog disappeared. And the man who tried to bury me in silence now lived in it himself. But that's not what satisfied me. It wasn't revenge. It was reclamation. The slow, deliberate gathering of pieces that once belonged to me. My dignity, my voice, my future. People ask if I ever regret not screaming at them, not throwing plates or burning clothes. And I tell them, no, because screaming would have made them the story. Silence made me the ending. I didn't need to ruin their lives. I just needed to remember mine was never theirs to rewrite. And that was enough.
It took almost a year, a full cycle of seasons before she showed up, my daughter. She didn't call first, she didn't email, she just appeared one Saturday morning at the library, standing by the entrance like a girl who'd wandered into a memory and wasn't sure if she'd be welcomed inside. She looked older. Not tired, but humbled. The kind of aging that comes from learning life the hard way. I was shelving books in the poetry section when I saw her. She walked toward me slowly, as if approaching something sacred. She didn't speak right away, just looked at me. Then, quietly, "Hi, Mama." I didn't rush to hug her. I didn't cry. I simply nodded. "Come, I'll take my break." We walked to the coffee shop across the street, sat in the same booth she used to love when she was a teenager. I ordered tea. She didn't order anything. And then, without prompting, she said, "I'm sorry." Her voice cracked. Her eyes filled. She reached across the table and held my hand. She whispered, "I was so afraid. Afraid to believe the truth, because if I did, I'd have to admit I let it happen, that I helped them take everything from you." I didn't speak. I let her spill what I had already known. That night at the hospital, when Dad told me you might not make it, I didn't want to think. Aunt Elisa was there. She cooked, she handled the bills, she kept smiling like nothing was wrong. And I let her. I let him. I let
Both of them convinced me you were already gone. Tears ran freely down her face. And when you came back, I didn't know how to face you. I thought silence would protect me, but it only protected them. I reached for her hand and held it tighter. Sometimes, I said gently, we betray the ones we love, not because we hate them, but because we're too weak to stand between them and harm. She nodded, sobbing now. I want to fix it. I want to earn your trust again. You don't need to fix anything, I told her. You just need to listen now, because one day it might be you sitting across from someone who tells you you're crazy, who tries to make you feel small for asking questions, who replaces love with guilt. And when that happens, I leaned in, my voice low and calm. Don't beg. Don't fold. Think. Then strike once and never look back. She let out a shaky breath, like a balloon slowly deflating after being held too tight. I smiled. I still love you. I never stopped. But love doesn't mean you don't leave people behind if they keep choosing blindness. She nodded slowly. I know, she whispered. We sat there a while longer. She showed me pictures of my granddaughter, told me she'd left her job, that she'd gone back to therapy, that she was rebuilding. And I could see it, in her posture, in her voice, in her eyes. The girl I raised was still in there. Bruised, yes, but rebuilding. Before we parted, she asked, "Do you think Dad regrets it?" I looked past her, out the window. Across the street, a man stood by a bus stop, alone, shoulders slumped, face shadowed beneath a worn cap. It wasn't Mark, but it could have been. He might, but that's his story to sit in, not mine to carry. She squeezed my hand one last time, and as she walked away, I realized something. I didn't just survive. I ended a cycle. And somewhere deep down, that little girl who once thought her mother could fix everything now knew that her mother had finally fixed herself. Not with rage, but with truth. And in the end, that was the greatest legacy I could pass down. If this story hit you in the chest the way it did me, share it. Comment below, what would you have done? And don't forget to subscribe for more stories of women who fought back and didn't flinch.